So, thank you everybody for coming tonight. We have our intentions tonight are to demonstrate our asset management plan for the City of Grand Forks. We have a couple of additional speakers tonight. We have Scott Shepard from Urban Systems. Scott's going to give us a federal look at things and let us understand a little bit more about our sustainable community plan and what got us to this point. And then we have the previous mayor from Golden joining us tonight to give the Golden experience. Christina Benty is going to talk to us a little bit about the challenges she challenged working in the city of Golden and how they evolved their asset management plan. And then at the end of it, I will take you to the point where we're talking a little bit about what Grand Forks has been doing over the last several years and give you an update on our business plan and where we are. And then after that, we'll open it up to some questions and we'll take it from there. We're going to do some PowerPoints, and the PowerPoints are going to be walked through by each of the presenters. After that's over, we'll let the PowerPoint, we'll let the presenters, let the other ones get started, and we'll try to answer some questions in between there. And if we can just raise our hands, and I'll bring the questions to you. Okay. So first, we have Scott Shepard from Urban Systems, our engineering consultants. Urban Systems has been with us for about 20 years, a little bit more than 20 years. They have a vast knowledge of our community when it comes to our infrastructure. And Scott's going to walk us through a PowerPoint. So welcome, Scott.
All right. Thanks, Doug. So I'm just going to start off here talking about what is asset management. It means lots of different things to everyone. So an accountant may have one definition of it compared to an engineer. So an accountant may think, asset management, you're talking about, your RSPs and your savings account and those kind of things. Whereas an engineer is thinking about infrastructure, roads, utilities, managing those assets. So a lot of different definitions out there. So I've just got a couple here. One from FCM that they've put out here about what is asset management. So it's combining engineering principles with sound business practices and economic theory and provide tools to facilitate a more organized and logical approach to decision making. So what FCM is saying is, let's use our engineering, our good business practices, economic theory, use some tools to inform your decision making. So they're, using some logic and science to making decisions and not just doing things ad hoc, short term. So think about the long term, put some science in behind your decision making. UBCM on the provincial level has a definition as well. They've recently put out a guide called the BC Framework for Asset Management for Sustainable Service Delivery. It's a tongue twister. So the definition that they've got in this guide here is the process of bringing together the skills and activities of people with the information about the community's physical infrastructure assets and the financial resources to ensure long-term service delivery. So what does that mean? That means essentially the same thing what FCM is talking about. Let's use the skills of our people, the best information we've got about your assets, your financial resources, to come up with some decisions and plans to enable long-term thinking about delivering services for the community. So it's not just about doing a 1 or 2 year capital plan. It's still thinking, okay, how are we going to deliver services in the long run to the community so that they are sustainable for today and into the future for future generations. So why the urgency about asset management? There's a lot of demand out there right now for spending the right amount of dollars on the right things at the right time to deliver those services. So those kind of things would be transparent, rational, cost-effective management of infrastructure, that decision making, governance. Good governance and sound planning goes a long way in terms of spending things at the right time and the right amount of money. The costs of renewing aging infrastructure is increasing. The longer we wait, the more costs are going up. Municipal deficits and reserves are diminishing, as we start spending money on different projects, not thinking about what it takes to deliver services, but maybe spending a lot more money on nice-to-have projects versus, the essential asset management, taking care of business today to make sure that you do have the services that you enjoy in the community. The other big one is grant requirements. So starting this year, the province and the feds have put requirements into their grant applications that communities do have, asset management plans and sustainable community plans that focus on delivering services sustainably through asset management and sound financial policies. So every application going forward now, there's lots of money out there right now through stimulus funding project, grants. So the city is in a good spot to be applying for those based on a lot of the work that's been done, and Doug will go through that some of that later. Planning, is often short-term and ignores those realities of infrastructure. So what are those realities? Infrastructure is expensive. To build it, maintain it, renew it, it costs a lot of money. A kilometer of road to replace that with some of the utilities, the electrical and stuff could cost about $1 million a kilometer. So that's pretty expensive, just to go out and so spending a lot of time investing in the maintenance of that and funding it properly, you can avoid that backlog of your infrastructure that's past its service life and failing. So you can see some examples here of potholes in the road, failing culverts and things. So if you're not putting the right amount of money in there, you're going to have a lower level of service here. You're not delivering those sustainable service levels by funding, road and drainage amounts. Infrastructure is going to age and fail. So as it ages, it's going to fail at some point. If you think about your car, it's going to age and fail at some point as well. So doing proper maintenance on it over time, you're going to keep your insurance costs, your repair bills down for the short term. But at some point, you keep sinking money into it. It's a lost effort, and you need to buy something new. So putting money aside for your new car or your new assets, maintains your service and your reliability of your vehicle, your assets. When we see failing infrastructure in the community, you see things with increased claims and complaints to this municipality. Potentially, people could move away and lose business. If there isn't a sound infrastructure in the community and a good level of service, people are going to move away. If your roads are looking like this and there's holes, maybe giant potholes like this, you're not going to want to live in that community. You're going to want to move away. So in terms of a national context about asset management, recently there was a Canadian infrastructure report card issued, which was an assessment of the condition of all the assets and the state of infrastructure management in Canada. So what FCM partnered up with Canadian Public Works Association, interviewed 123 municipalities across all provinces, representing about 60% of the population. What they found is that about a third of the infrastructure has already passed its service life and needs significant improvement. And in dollars, that's about $170 billion right now in infrastructure in Canada that needs to be replaced. So of that, 50% is in roads, 25 probably in wastewater treatment, and 15 in municipal drinking water systems. So all these systems here need urgent repair, $170 billion. So there's a lot of focus by the federal government and the provincial government on how do we tackle that challenge. It's not going to be up to the feds and the province. We need the community and municipalities involved in this as well. So FCM joined forces with the National Research Council and put together a guide here about how do you make sustainable municipal infrastructure decisions. So they've come together here with a guide to help everybody, how do we tackle this problem? So what they came up with was 7 fundamental elements, questions that you should consider in your investment planning. What do you have, where is it, what is it worth, what's the condition, when do you need to do it, how much is it going to cost, what's the risk that's acceptable to the community, and how do you ensure that long-term affordability? So when Doug speaks later, you'll see that a lot of the work that has been done attempted to go through these 7 questions here. So those were the foundation of a lot of the stuff that was done previously here at Grand Forks. On the provincial context here, in 2009, the province undertook quite a few pilot initiatives to try and get a handle on, what our communities are doing, and what can be done. So a few of the things that they've done, there was the PSAP 3150, so that's an accounting requirement that all communities had to put all their assets into the financial system and account for the depreciation of those assets. So all communities in the province do have an inventory of all their assets that they own in the community and have a depreciated value for all of those. A couple of the other things that they did, they developed a tool to assess the state in each community of where they are with asset management, developed a roadmap, some policy guidelines, and then issued a report on the state of asset management in BC. What the findings showed there is that there's a lot of interest in adopting asset management business principles with communities, but there's an inability to adopt and sort of reap the benefits of asset management. So you hear from Christina later on how communities can do that. Won't steal her thunder there. So again, on the provincial concept, recently UBCM, the Ministry of Community Sport, Culture Development, Asset Management BC, and Urban Systems helped together to put together the framework for asset management for sustainable service delivery. So this was developed to meet the administrative requirements in the new gas tax agreement. Communities all get a certain amount of gas tax funding each year that they can put towards infrastructure renewal, and then they also do have some grant funding that you can apply to for projects as well. So if you've got an asset management plan that is aligned with the framework here, then you're in good standing with the province in terms of getting some additional gas tax monies than what's allotted to each community. And Doug will walk through the framework in a little bit more detail as well through his presentation. So what are some of the other communities doing? A lot of the communities in your area, the list here are all the ones that I've worked with recently. They've all got asset management plans. They're all a little bit different. They need to be tailored to each different community and what the vision and the goals and objectives of each of those communities are. So, Cranbrook and Peachland, Kelowna, Lake Country, Vernon, Port Moody, the Regional District of Central Okanagan, they all have got asset management plans. Every one of them is slightly different. There isn't one plan that fits all. Everything is community specific based on the vision and the goals of those communities. And of course, Grand Forks and Doug will walk us through what the city has been doing. So all the stuff that was going on with the feds, with the infra guide, a lot of the talk about the infrastructure report card, a lot of this stuff informed the vision and the challenges that Grand Forks was facing when the Sustainable Community Plan was developed. So the plan focused on answering these 4 questions here. And I think there's one of the slides over there that talks about the guiding principles for asset management that the city is following. So that was based on the Sustainable Community Plan. So there's 4 key questions that the plan tried to answer. What can we do to make the community more sustainable and self-sufficient? What can we do to strategically, sustainably deliver affordable services? And what will the city's future economic base be comprised of? How do we attract young families to the community and keep them to stay here? So through the Sustainable Community Plan, there was a lot of principles identified in there. And one of the ones that came out was the development of an asset management plan. So that's really the background as to why a lot of the asset management work was done. The Sustainable Community Plan was started back in about 2007-8 and then was finally adopted in 2011, just as the asset management plan started to get rolling, to help answer how the city was going to do those 4 things. So asset management, where does that fit in Grand Forks in your hierarchy of plans? So at the top of the pyramid, or the box in this case, the community has either an official community plan or a sustainable community plan. In Grand Forks' case, you've got a sustainable community plan that is essentially your OCP, official community plan. So that talks about your land use and your sustainability principles and policies that the community is going to follow. So those principles that are in the sustainable community plan inform the asset management plan. And then from there, the asset management plan and the principles and policies that come from there inform each of the infrastructure master plans, for water, sewer, storm, transportation, some of the non-linear ones, parks, rec, facilities, and then again, you get down to your maintenance here as well. So asset management is key in determining, how do you plan for infrastructure, how are you going to maintain it, and then the ongoing annual design, planning, and operations for each of those things. So again, what is asset management? One way I like to look at it is how do we balance the long-term infrastructure costs against the available revenues to set affordable levels of service that are acceptable, to the residents, the businesses, and industry. You know, what it takes, you know, is you're going to need a community-wide effort in order to be successful at asset management. You know, sound planning, governance, you know, they're vital to the well-being of the community. And Christina will talk a little bit about how you do that from a top-down approach, and that's the way Grand Forks have done their plan as well. So just lastly, how does the community benefit from this? You know, you move from building and operating to a community that's got reliable infrastructure based on sound planning. Well, that's the framework of a sustainable, vibrant community. You know, that long-term sustainability, you know, you're meeting the needs of today without compromising future generations' needs, but while you're still encouraging growth and economic development. So a lot of this plan here too is, you know, you need to generate more revenues through growth, economic development, other options as well. And so as well as one of the benefits is tackling that infrastructure problem. So having a plan in place to address that failing infrastructure and creating a long-term model to be able to address those and quantifying, you know, what are the investment priorities and the benefits for the public. That's all I got.
Thank you, Scott. So that was a good overview of kind of what's been going on in infrastructure across Canada. We know that we have a significant challenge in Grand Forks. Okay, so what I'd like to do now is I'd like to introduce Christina Benty. Christina Benty was the mayor for Golden. She was the elected official in Golden for over 12 years. She decided to not run in the last local election. She was also a representative on the Association of Kootenai Boundaries Local Government. She sat on different policy groups, and she has pretty much become an evangelist for asset management in British Columbia. Very fortunate to have her join us today. She's going to share the insight from a politician who used to be on the other side and now is a recovering politician. So in this situation right now, she'll be able to share some different insight that you wouldn't typically hear from myself standing in front of you today. So without further, Christina.
Great, thank you. So thanks for coming out tonight, and thanks to Doug for having me. I'm absolutely thrilled to be here. And I want to give a shout out to Grand Forks and say that although Scott indicated that there's a number of communities that are doing asset management plans, most of the communities around the province are going, what the heck is asset management? And now what do we do? So Grand Forks is ahead of the curve, just like Golden is. And I'm here to tell you this evening I'm going to tell you about Golden's story, but also my story. So I did, as Doug indicated, I did 12 years in local government, two terms on council, and 2 terms as mayor. And during my second term as mayor, I decided to do a master's of arts in leadership at Royal Roads University. And I did my research project on asset management and community engagement. So that's part of my story. And I call my presentation Confessions of a Recovering Politician. And the reason I do that is when you got a politician talking about pipes and crack, you often think of this guy. But it's actually not that kind of confession. It's not quite as exciting as that kind of confession. My confession is that I used to be one of those people that in 2002 when I ran for council, I was like, taxes, what are they? What's the town doing with all the money that I give them? What are those guys even doing with my taxes? Where does my money go? And I can tell you that I have learned a lot in my 12 years on local government, and I've become a real advocate for local government services. And you know, as a politician, we talk about what those local government services are and what they're worth. And so when I go and speak to elementary schools, I do a little bit of a demonstration. I bring a jar, it's full of candy, and it's got stickers all over it. And the stickers list all the government, the services that the local government provides. And I try to focus on the ones that the kids like the skateboard park and the pool and the parks and the trails, the things that they use. But I also list the fact that water and sewer and sidewalks and all of those things that local government does and provides. And I tell them, okay, and I give them some Monopoly money. And I tell them this jar of candy is worth $2,000. And I give them enough Monopoly money that they've all got $2,000. And I'm like, so can any one of you buy it? They're like, no, we can't do it. So what are you going to do? If you want this jar of candy, what are you going to do? And they're like, well, if we pool our money, we can get this jar of candy. And I'm like, okay, but here's the deal. It has to be distributed equally. So it doesn't matter what you put in, you all get the same amount of candy. And so that perspective on taxes, trying to educate the young people that I think we need a cultural shift on taxes, and I'm going to demonstrate why. I think that that's really important. So I'm going to show you my household expenses, all right? I spend $90 a week on car, and there's 2 cars in my household, house and life insurance, $90 a week. I spend $75 a week on phone and internet. That does not include cable. I don't watch any TV, I don't watch Netflix, I watch some things on the internet, but that's just phone and internet. When I take the municipal portion of my tax dollars and I add them to my utility costs and I divide that up, it's $44 a week. And currently there's 2 people that live in my house, so that's $22 per person. When there used to be 5 of us, it was a lot less per person. And I've got 3 grown kids that have long since gone there. But I think it's really important to have a cultural shift on taxes, and I'll tell you why. These are all the things that I get from my taxes. I can't tell you what I get from my insurance, although it's important to have insurance, don't get me wrong. However, I can list all of these services that I get from my local government every day. So I think it's a smoking deal, if you ask me. And as a politician, and I learning about local government services and becoming an advocate for those services and the cost of those services, then when the staff started talking to me about asset management, it was an easy sell. Well, maybe not right away. So I'm here to tell you about the Golden experience and my story as well, and not just because I know about it, because I'm actually really, really interested in it. It's very important to me, so much so that it dominated the writing. When I was doing my master's, it really dominated my reflections and my writing, my paper, and then it turned into, end up being a thesis that I ended up doing. So our purpose for practicing asset management essentially was, how do we have the conversation? How do we balance the cost to provide, maintain, and renew infrastructure, and, if necessary, eliminate community-owned capital assets? And balancing that, essentially the question is, what do you want, and what are you willing to pay for, right? So, our process, we got involved with the National Asset Management Strategy out of Australia. We got involved with that program there, and we made it part of our corporate work plan. Since 2011, we adopted a policy, and I'm actually going to be talking about that policy momentarily. We also approved long-term financial policies in 2013 and created a non-statutory asset management reserve. So that was our process. So in terms of our policies for practicing asset management, Council decided there we go. That we were going to be proactive rather than reactive. In other words, we made a commitment to retain our existing services and to maximize their asset life cycles rather than ignoring them and reacting to them when they fell apart. Oops. We also decided that staff capacity was really, really important. In other words, Council acknowledged that asset management was important enough that we would support the appropriate level of staff so that we could maintain a proactive approach. What this means is that it doesn't happen off the side of someone's desk. And oftentimes that's what happens in communities, is that if it's not a strategic priority, then it happens off the side of somebody's desk because they have to get it done. We said no way. We acknowledged the fact that we needed to have the resources to make sure that we were doing our asset management plan. We decided to focus on asset renewal focus. Council chose to focus on high value classes such as water and sewer and roads because we recognize that those classes provided the foundation for services in our community. That being said, Council also had a discussion around the importance of maintaining other assets that provide a quality of life. So it is about balancing those quality of life issues, but you won't have a quality of life if you're not looking after your current assets. We put money into our budget for condition assessment funding, so that was just automatically part of our budget. Again, it didn't get argued, it's just something that we do. We agreed to borrow. We agreed that long-term borrowing was a valid tool to achieve our objectives. However, it's a little bit like having too much body and not enough blanket. In 2012, we determined that we had $40.5 million of an infrastructure deficit. That's way too much body and way too little blanket. That's the reality.
So who are you borrowing the money from?
So we agreed to borrow from MFA. We're not like the Municipal Finance Authority, so we agreed to borrow money to leverage dollars for the New Canada Build Fund. And Council agreed that that was a tool that they would use. And again, I'm going to talk a little bit about the fact that having an infrastructure deficit of that size, there's no easy solution and there's no short-term solution. And Doug will often refer to this as a marathon. It's actually a relay race. And I'm going to talk a little bit about why we're in this relay race to begin with. So we decided we would focus on existing assets. So in other words, we were in asset renewal shall supersede the creation of new assets. And the impacts of accumulated amortization would be considered in all new asset proposals. So at all levels of government, politicians love shiny new objects. And often we made a commitment to focusing on our existing assets. And I'm going to tell you a little bit of a story here, because this happens in communities all the time. So we had a well-meaning group of people come and do a presentation at council, and they said, we want an outdoor rink. We want an outdoor skating rink. And they said, we've got guys ready to go, and they're ready to build that rink. We'll build the facility, we'll have the seating area, and we need you to donate the land, but we've got the resources, we've raised some funds, we're ready to build this facility. And so I said, so who's gonna own it? Well, you are, the local government. Well, who's gonna manage it? Well, you are. Who's gonna maintain it? Well, you are. And all of a sudden, you're standing there with as a council under political pressure to add to your asset register without taking into consideration what the long-term impacts of that is. And oftentimes, if you turn something like that down, you look like the bad guy. You look like the person that's the jerk, turning down new assets that are being donated to you. And so there's a lot of political pressure that's involved. And again, people got in the street, those jerks in town hall, they won't listen to, we tried to do something really positive in our community and they won't necessarily let us do it. So it's, the public can apply a fair amount of pressure sometimes. So I think it's important to acknowledge. Council also considered budget reduction proposals. In other words, that we would consider divesting ourselves of non-critical assets, low-value assets. But there's a caveat to that. Sometimes what you might think as a council is a low-value asset, and it's not getting a lot of use, there may be people in the community that are emotionally attached to that. For instance, we inherited a heritage building that needed $30,000 to even just to bring it up to code, and then we would have to maintain it and operate it after that. And council decided they were going to divest themselves of that. That did, there's some political pressure that happens around that when you decide that you're not going to accept someone's heritage building and you're going to look to divest yourselves of that. You can be under some scrutiny, under heavy criticism for that kind of activity. And I'll tell you another story that again relates to service levels and levels of service. So Golden had the worst performing transit in the province. And so if we were going to have a cost recovery on taking transit, it would probably cost each person that took the transit $500 every time they got on. So for council, when we were looking at that, and then we were looking at renewing our agreement with BC Transit, we had to invest more money into additional equipment and buses, and we decided, it's kind of a no-brainer, and it was an easy budget cut for council. It was an easy way to cut the budget. However, we did a poor job, and this is the message to the politicians. We did a poor job of engaging the community and having the conversation and saying, you know what, this is what the cost is. What would you do if you were in our shoes? And we got quite a bit of backlash over that. And again, it was an obvious decision of council to cut that in the budget, but we failed to engage the community at the level that we probably should have, so that we had that conversation. We ended up with a huge petition that was received in council chambers. And one of the things that I said was, it's really important, it's fine to sign a petition, but if there's no financial value attached to it, sometimes that doesn't necessarily it doesn't have all the information that the council needs. If everybody would have signed the petition and said, I'm willing to pay an extra $40 more on my taxes, then my guess is the number of signatures might have been reduced in that. So that's a really important communication piece, that councils have very difficult decisions to make, difficult financial decisions. And sometimes you just make those deliberately, saying, this is a worthwhile investment in our community. The rate of return is different than a financial rate of return, but it's got to be a deliberate decision. So, in terms of a purpose for practicing asset management, as I said before, Doug has referred to it as a marathon. I'm starting to refer to it as a relay. Is that relay race is about handing off the baton from council to council to council to council. It is not, it's longer than a marathon, much longer. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about what we did in our involvement with the National Asset Management Strategy. So this is what NAMS did for us. It allowed us to do our assessment on our sewer conditions and put them into the register. We did our road conditions, and this is just a portion of our community. Rated them, did all of our water conditions. And with all our asset conditions combined, we came up with 19 asset renewal projects. So what it did is it provided us as a council the empirical evidence for making decisions. So those decisions weren't based on politics and on whose street we wanted to pave. It was actually, or where we were going to put our money. If we had the empirical evidence to be able to make informed decisions. And Grand Forks is doing the same things. You're doing condition assessments, you've got evidence, you've got the information that you need in order to prioritize your decision making, and that's incredibly important. And what does it mean? It still means too much body and not enough blanket. We all need lots and lots and lots of money. And local governments have been lobbying for years for federal monies on existing infrastructure and money from the province on existing infrastructure. Traditionally, the feds in the province have put money into new projects, and all that lobbying is finally paid off, and money is coming from the feds in the province to leverage for existing infrastructure.
So you're saying all this money is coming from the government through the MFA, or is this a privatization of natural resources?
No, I'm not talking about privatization of natural resources. I'm talking about leveraging local tax dollars with provincial money and federal money.
So there's
To
no
get to
corporation,
an
there's no
order.
private money in this?
No, we're talking about leveraging federal money and provincial money in order to do infrastructure renewal projects within our communities.
How do you mean
And-
leveraging? Could you explain what you mean?
So leveraging, so it's generally 1/3, 1/3, 1/3. So Grand Forks and places like Grand Forks and Golden that have asset management plans, and we've done our condition assessments, we're able to go and we're able to take that, because we have asset management plans, we're out of the gate early and we're able to apply for shovel-ready projects to the
Leverage.
feds and to the province. So if, for example, if you've got a $3 million project, the community puts in that 1 million, the feds put in $1 million, and the province puts in $1 million. Does that make sense?
Sorry, but
So
where
I'm
does the
gonna-
leverage come in? I'm sorry, where does
So
the
you're
leverage-
leveraging, so it's kind of a good deal. If you, if you go to the grocery store and two people, you buy a jug of milk for $3 and two people show up and say, I'll just give you $1 for well, actually, that's not a good way to explain it, sorry.
Actually, can we save the questions till afterwards so we can actually get through the presentations? And then what we'll do is we'll bring Scott, myself, and Christina to the front, and we'll answer some questions that are directly related to the presentations. That'd be great.
Awesome. All right. So,
Does that mean you're going to answer the question?
absolutely, I'll be happy to. Yep. So why are we in this position? We're in this position because councils in the past have deferred infrastructure projects, and communities have said that they have expectations oftentimes during elections, people talk about what they want more of. And they don't talk about things like water and sewer and roads and sidewalks because they're not very sexy. But it is the foundation of our community. And so past councils have ignored and deferred infrastructure projects. And citizens have demanded lower taxes. And they were not paying for the true cost of providing that infrastructure. So in some ways, it's similar to the way we treat our physical body. We often don't pay attention until something goes wrong. And you experience two pains. You either experience the pain of regret or the pain of discipline. And we're experiencing the pain of regret currently. So for me, Golden was seen as a leader for small communities. And we had the dedicated resources, we had the data, and we had very difficult decisions to make. However, we needed to talk to our community about it. And so that's actually what fueled my research project. And part of that was simply because we knew the information, but the community didn't necessarily know where we were at. And so that's why I called this the check engine light is on, but how do you get the community to care? It's similar to, you'll notice that if you read the Globe and Mail now, the oil and gas industry has got big, huge ads out. And what happened is in the past, they just basically did their job and kept their head down. All of a sudden they put their heads up and saw that everybody was angry at them and they had to defend themselves. And so now they're paying attention to how they communicate. And so in many ways, local governments have been the same way. The staff have been living under the awareness of all these assets and the cost of providing infrastructure and providing services. But it hasn't necessarily been communicated to the public, and the politicians haven't necessarily been communicating it to the public as well. We need to have these community conversations. So when I started my master's research project, I wanted to find out how the community of Golden could engage the community on asset management. Because traditionally, you don't have those kind of conversations as a community. But with the changes to the way social media and the growing distrust for governments, it's time that we have these conversations as a community. It's not, the elected officials need to be talking to their community, the staff, we're all in this together, and I think that that's a really important message. So I wanted to know, how do we have these conversations? How do we have these conversations about about our assets and how we replace them in the long term? So I wanted to make sure that we were finding a way to communicate the context of our reality. And we know the magnitude of the problem. How do we get people to pay attention? So I'll show you a couple of my slides here. And this is, I used 2 data collection tools. I did a survey. I looked at other surveys that had been done in the past, and I had a World Cafe. So I'm just going to give you a couple highlights from that during my project. So, you know, this indicated that about 63% of the respondents gave themselves, you know, they felt that they were quite knowledgeable about local government services. And this was confirmed by other questions and the World Cafe data that I brought as well. Interestingly enough, I think especially in small communities, in terms of reaching out to people for information, the newspaper, Facebook, and email was top of list. And what I think is interesting about that, it demonstrates the importance of your local newspaper in terms of getting out information. Most people still like to read the newspaper. And I think, I don't know about Grand Forks, but in Golden, Facebook has really replaced the word of mouth and the bakery conversations. The bakery conversations still take place, but Facebook, one thing gets out and everybody knows real quickly and they start talking about it really fast. And local governments haven't quite wrapped their head around what to do with social media, so it's kind of interesting. So this question is interesting. Over 60% supported tax increases for more services. And this was also confirmed by an open-ended question that I asked, and by other studies that I looked at in other communities. I would have a caveat though again. So the caveat is that I think we think we're idealists sometimes, and that we tend to focus on desirability than reality. And we often think, well, you know, if I asked whether I believe in anti-idling, I say I believe in anti-idling, but then I might idle my car a little longer than I should. Or I believe in eating healthy, but when it comes to, do I have that extra piece of chocolate or whatever it is I do? So oftentimes, you know, I thought this was kind of interesting that people said, yes, I will pay more taxes for more services, but that doesn't mean that when it comes down to actually doing it, it doesn't always go over really well. But what I thought was interesting here is, and I did ask the question, I'd be willing to pay more money to maintain the existing level of service. More people were interested in at least maintaining the level of service or increasing the amount of taxes. Now this one was really interesting. What do you think the approximate cost of replacing one block of sidewalk? So over 66% underestimated the amount by 50,000, and 30% were out by 70,000. That's huge. This next question, what do you think is the approximate cost of replacing one block of road with curb, gutter, water, and sewer lines? 77% underestimated by 500,000, and 60% were out by over $1 million. And to me, this demonstrates a lack of understanding around the magnitude of the cost, and that's really important to understand, because I think that we all value that infrastructure, but it's recognizing the magnitude of the cost to provide that infrastructure. So, and another one of my questions here, I think, you know, it demonstrates that, at least in my case in Golden, 92% of the public, they want to know when there's any changes to level of service. And so the message to the corporation, to the town itself, and to the politician is that engagement and communication are really, really critical. And I think I demonstrated earlier, attaching that financial value and understanding to that communication is really, really important. So I did ask one open-ended question, and this was a mistake because it created a heck of a lot of data for me to actually sort through. I ended up with, I can't even tell you how much data that I had to sort through, and in retrospect, it just about buried me, and I wasn't quite sure what to do. So the cost to deliver service and maintain infrastructure to the residents of Golden is increasing. How should the town approach this challenge? And I just want to demonstrate here that there's comments like this in every town, not just in Grand Forks, but in Golden too. So value for money and efficient service delivery. So making the assumption that it's not that the value for money isn't being received or that service delivery isn't being effective. And everybody thinks that in their town. There's often a lack of trust between the political bodies and the corporation as a whole and the community. When I think I demonstrated earlier, I could list all the services that I received in my town for a smoking good deal. The other thing that came up was quit wasting money on overstaffing. And you hear that in every community, right? We think that because 20 years ago, so-and-so there was only 3 people in town hall and now there's 10. You know, what are all these people doing? And again, that's what I thought 12 years ago before I got involved in local government, and I really saw how the regulatory environment that exists now requires the staff, I can assure you, are constantly being chased by monsters. They never get their work done, ever, because they can't, there's not enough of them. But I guess what I'm trying to say is that this is the conversation in every community, that keep it lean, try multiple job roles, higher productivity from staff. So imagine walking into the home of a mom who has 3 children and 3 little children, and she's just spent all day with them trying to keep them entertained and busy and fed and everything. And somebody walks in and goes, "So what do you do anyway? What do you do?" You know, that wouldn't go over too well. And lots of times, I think that's kind of what happens in communities is we assume that, well, what are those guys doing anyway? Attract more people, foster population growth and economic development. And I will say one thing about economic development, and that is, if anybody knows how to really do economic development, communities right across the province we need to do economic development. If someone finds the magic bullet of how to pin Jello to the wall, then you win. You win. Because it's a mystery. It's a mystery in every local government right across the continent. But there were lots of increased taxes and raised taxes, so a recognition that the cost of providing services is going up, and that we need to increase taxes. And that taxes should be raised, this is a comment, taxes should be raised incrementally to keep things in good condition and keep a town that is attractive and desirable, as well as not neglecting of its assets. So that was a direct quote from somebody. So I'm just going to quickly go over some of my study findings. And my study findings were based on literature review, my research, all the data collection tools that I used, and the data analysis from the open-ended question. And citizens expect to be involved in local government decisions, and they want to say on how their tax dollars are spent. This second finding, and I didn't include all the findings in the slide, but the very fact that communication, engagement, and education are really critical. So a message to the politicians is engaging the public. Get yourself educated and educate your public. Have those conversations. And of course, my recommendation to the town of Golden, which the town is working on right now, is pursuing augmentation of revenue streams. So, and Doug's going to talk a little bit about your own revenue streams for infrastructure and asset management. So, in terms of recommendations, the recommendations that I have for the town of Golden is they were mindful of the fact that there's limited capacity in local governments, and but it's still important to engage your residents and communicate and educate them on local government and on asset management. Because really, we're all in this together at the end of the day. And so I've got a 3-part message I want to close with here. The message to the corporation. Complexity is the enemy of execution. Don't try to boil the ocean. That's a message to the corporation. Make it simple and clear. The staff need to be sharing their infrastructure burden. They have the data, they have the information. You need to be sharing it with the politicians, and you need to be sharing it with the community. Council, you're elected to a position of public trust, and you have a stewardship responsibility. And you can't risk that stewardship responsibility by shirking your asset management duties. They're incredibly important. And it's not just for your term, it's for future generations. It's not a marathon. I mean, it's not a sprint. And Doug's going to change his language now, right? It's going to be a relay. And finally, to the community. It is not us and them. We're all in this together, and it's really important to remember that we've inherited this prosperity. We've been using these assets for years, and we have a collective responsibility. And we need to stop shouting at each other and have conversations about why this is important and why we need to be talking about it and why we need to be investing in our infrastructure. And lots of times when things in the economy are going well, people, they don't like paying taxes, but they don't complain about it too much. Anytime an economy starts struggling, what becomes a focal point? It becomes taxes, and the elected officials at the local level become a focal point, and they get targeted. And the reality is, we need to look at what it is that we get for our taxes and value those services. So community engagement is messy. It is challenging. It's difficult to have those conversations, but it's incredibly healthy. And so it's worth the effort. And the very fact that you're here, that Grand Forks is hosting something like this so that you can have these kind of conversations, go out and talk about it at the bakery, talk about it on Facebook, talk about the fact that we need to be talking about asset management. And Doug's going to talk a little bit about that further. So I do consider myself an asset management evangelist. I think my lived experience as a politician and my academic experience gives me the opportunity to actually to talk about it, and talk about it in ways that I think that hopefully are meaningful and that will make a difference. So I'm happy to be here, and I'm happy to answer questions about leveraging, and I want to thank you all for being here and participating.
Thank you, Christina. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to talk a little bit about the City of Grand Forks and where we are in this process. What I'm going to do is I'm going to actually walk you through a little bit about some information on the gas tax funding and what the city has been participating in creating this process for being shelf ready and being ready and being ahead of the curve. So I was invited to participate with Asset Management BC. I'm currently the Vice President of the Public Works Association, a volunteer position. Within that group, Asset Management BC is a group of professionals that represent the Local Government Management Association, that represent the Province of British Columbia. We represent the Planning Institute of British Columbia. We represent the Finance Authority of British Columbia. We represent all the different bodies, and what we do is we come together to try to find the solutions here and create a model that we can all use and be unilateral across local governments, that a town like Zabalas could use, even to a community the size of Vancouver could utilize. So Asset Management BC, the working group, is a professional group of people. We have these folks here, and they represent some different organizations. But it was a lot of work, and there was a lot of Saturdays and Sundays. But at the end of the day, it was a group that were working together to try to find a solution for all the local governments in British Columbia. So the framework, the Asset Management Service Delivery Framework was, I said, again, it was meant to be able to be passed along to other local governments. We didn't want to create something that was proprietary that we couldn't share with our partners, because we know that we're all in this, we have this funding shortage, but we had to find a way to be able to pass and share that knowledge. So that's one of the things we're trying to do in local governments is that the town of Zabalas or Fruitvale, and the last phone call I had last week was saying, well, what are we doing? How are we going to do it? The executive assistant at their office was working on that project, and she was working off the side of the desk on asset management. She said, well, I've been in charge of asset management. I said, oh. I said, really? I said, that's impossible. You can't do it off the side of your desk. So what we did here is we talked about the Asset Management for Sustainable Service Delivery, or BC framework. And what we were focusing on is the what and the why, but not the how, because each local government is going to get there their own way. Whether they decide they're going to utilize taxation increases or they're going to look at alternative revenue streams, that was up to that local government to determine how they're going to do it. But it's the what and the why. Again, it was the UBCM, the Union of British Columbia Municipalities, the Ministry of Community Sport and Cultural Development, the Public Works Association, Asset Management BC, and Urban Systems. Urban Systems plays a big role in this in a leadership perspective. They've taken on this as a key component of their business model, but it's also they provide a lot of support across British Columbia. It was developed to meet the administrative requirements of the renewed gas tax agreement. So what that means is the gas tax, what the federal government was saying, we're going to put some more money out there, but if you don't have a plan in place, you don't get any money. They used to reward communities for failing. If you went and said, oh, our sewage treatment plant is overflowing right now, we need a couple $1 million, they used to come to your aid. But now they're saying to you, if you don't have an asset management plan in place, forget about it. You fall to the bottom of the pile. And I can assure you that that pile for grants will be massive this year. There's the Strategic Priorities Fund, and there's another component which is the planning grant component. It'll be overprescribed. Every community in BC, there's everybody will be looking for some grant funding this year through the gas tax funding. We have a short version of the program that's available on the Asset Management BC website, and the long version is going to be coming out shortly. So that was basically the model that communities can incorporate as their business plan. So we didn't want to reinvent the wheel, so we just utilized the wheel. And what we utilized here was looking at the key components of it. Every local government does this every year. We currently assess. Councils sit together and they assess what they're doing. They assess their practices. They assess everything, the services that they deliver. They assess grant and aid programs. They assess all these different things. But we're talking about tangible capital assets. So what we do is we work through the assessment component, then we go into our plan component, and then we go into the implement component. This component here is the long-term planning, the asset management planning, the strategies and how we're going to get there. And then we talk about the financial impacts and how we're going to implement these practices, how we're going to do it with our staff, how are we going to get there, how are we going to measure and report, how do we know we're being successful with our asset management plan, how do we know if they're actually working. And that's one of our biggest challenges. The community says, well, you know, you're failing in this respect because this road is broken, or my sidewalk is cracked, or the snow isn't removed off my street in a timely fashion. That's how we measure and report, and we measure back in how we're doing with our maintenance management programs. We engage the community, we review our practices, we communicate out. We're continually communicating out on how we do these things. Whether it's working with council, reporting out in our management reports at the council meetings, or having a session like this. This session is long overdue, but it's a session that's required for us to reach back out to the community and say, this is what our staff has been doing. We look at our finances, we look at the people, we talk about the assets, we take the information, and we need to harness that information. And then the goal and the objective is a sustainable service delivery. So that's identified in our sustainable community plan. So why asset management? We've already been through that. I don't need to rediscuss that. The process, but really the process of bringing together the skills and the activities of people with information about the community's physical infrastructure assets, financial resources to ensure long-term sustainable service delivery. We don't want to be in a position where we are passing along this burden to the next generation. Councils of the past that decided one day, they said, well, let's give them a 0% tax increase this year. That only means we're just deferring the debt to the next group. That's all that means. Unless they're actually reducing the level of service to balance that budget, they're just saying, let's defer. And that's what they've done. And they didn't do that with any intent. And I want to make that clear because there was always the best of intentions, because there's always the public pressure to say, please give us a 0% tax increase. That's what we would like to elect you on a platform of 0% tax increase because we want to protect our costs. But the reality is the city of Grand Forks is worth $127 million. How can we realistically give a 0% tax increase without either reducing our levels of service or reducing the number of assets that we have? So the core elements of the program, we talked a little bit about that. The process, we talked a little bit about reviewing this process each year. Every year we will do this. As staff, we review this all the time. When somebody comes to me with a project, it comes to my desk and they say, well, this is what I would like to do. And I say, well, how does that fit into the asset management plan? How does that fit into the overall practices of the budget? When a budget item comes forward, this year we were talking about a new dump truck. And I said to the public works manager, I said, so where does that fit in the asset management plan? That's $175,000. How do we put that into the plan for replacement? Do we need that? What level of service do we have? So how can we make that decision? And council was asked that question too. We talked about new bleachers at James Donaldson Park. Is that an asset that we really want to invest in at this point, or can we do some maintenance on that and extend the life of that asset out? These are the decisions that we make, but this is the criteria that we use here, coming back to this process. So we come back and we're assessing. We assess and we talk to council about these things. We look at our asset inventory, we assess the conditions, which we've done. We look at the level of service, and that means, do we need sidewalks on both sides of the streets on our local roads where we only have 10 houses? Do we need a sidewalk on both sides of the street? It would be nice. How wide do our sidewalks need to be? Have we ever seen a traffic jam on the sidewalk? Can we afford to have that? How wide do the roads really need to be when we get down to replacing our roads? We talk about divesting ourselves. Roads right now, they may be 4 meters in travel width on a local road, from yellow line to the edge of the shoulder. Vehicles are getting smaller, so we should be looking at our assets and our roads and saying, can we reduce the size of our roads? Is that important to the public? Can we afford a bike lane on 68? We have a sidewalk, we share the road. The traffic counts are so low that we can share the road. So we have a share-out. Somebody says, well, I want a bike lane. Well, let's go back to assessing this. Let's determine the level of service that you can afford to have. The risk level, and this may sound a little bit callous, but council has to make risk level decisions. If it's life and death, that's obviously the risk level that they don't want to take. If it means that one person's home is going to get backed up with sewer, is that too much risk? If a pothole every kilometer, is that enough risk? We talk about levels of service. So those are the types of risks we have to look at, and that's what council's constantly dealing with. If council wanted everything to be perfect, which they could have, there could never be a crack in the road. There would never be a piece of sidewalk that was heating because of a root. That level of service would go way up, the risk level would be way down, and our costs would be very high to operate. So then we have to plan. We have to have a policy in place. So we have a policy that directs our staff. Council is the keeper of policy. Councils get re-elected or get elected, or they get re-elected, but they establish policy on direction for the municipality. Those are our marching orders. So as staff, we follow policy. And the strategies. Council's going to be going into strategic planning. You just heard a session, you had a session a couple weeks ago where you came in and council asked for your opinion on what you thought was important for the community. It gives them a little bit of gives them some direction moving into strategic planning. The asset management plan has to be user-friendly. It has to be a long-term document that identifies the current state of the assets. It has to measure the risk, the cost, and the timing of activities. And we have to be able to maintain and provide those levels of service. That's the biggest challenge that we face. Then we have to integrate that long-term asset management plan that identifies the long-term investment gaps required and the revenues that we have. So what we're talking about right now is saying, how much revenue can we ask the taxpayer for, and how much revenue should we be looking for outside of our normal operations? So when we talk about that, the previous council talked about community forests. What type of revenue opportunities were there? They looked at looking at the Lands Development Showcase. The Lands Development Showcase was taking current lands that were zoned according to the zoning bylaw, which had a community input, by taking those lands and generating revenue from taxation. So that's leveraging your assets to generate revenue. We've been working with Selkirk College to generate an education program where folks will come in from other communities to learn about asset management practices from our community, and that'll generate some economic development in our community while we're sharing the message and generating our awareness of asset management. So that's the idea, working with the planning. Then we have to implement. We implement the actions and build the systems and create that. So what we're doing right now is we're taking our information that we have from all of the years, 100 years of plans. Everybody talks about all these plans, you go down the basement and there's plans coming out everywhere. And what we're doing is taking all those plans and consolidating that information. And then we have to be able to measure and report. So an example of this, and I talked to Public Works about this, and I said, so we own a $35 million road system. We own a $3.6 million parks operation business. We invest the same amount of maintenance money into each of those. Does that make sense? No. We own a $35 million road business, and we're saying that we can put the same amount of resources into each of them. It doesn't make any sense from a business planning perspective. So we're constantly going through this process. We have to align ourselves internally. That's the most important thing, is we have to have council, we have to have our staff understanding these priorities, and that's a bottom-up approach and a top-down approach. And we have to communicate the service levels and the trade-offs. When we talk about that with the community, what are the trade-offs? What are the trade-offs when we come to these things? Is the community willing to have a road that's 25 centimeters less wide? And we talk about that over 53 kilometers, and we take 25 centimeters off the width of the road. We talk about the order of magnitude that could create for us in cost savings. But that's the trade-offs, the level of service. Do we have a bike lane? Is that important? Do we have a sidewalk on both sides of the street? So those are the costs and the trade-offs. When we don't have sidewalks on both sides of the street, we don't have to have maintenance on those sidewalks and removing the snow. So there's a reduction in our costs in just the maintenance alone. Narrower roads where we require less passes from the snowplow, less salt and sand that has to go down. Just an example. I mean, I'm only talking about it from a small bite-sized chunks. Like Christina said, don't try to boil the ocean, because if you try to boil the ocean, you won't be successful. That's an example of what the province and the plan that we were working with. But the case study for us in talking about what Grand Forks is doing, Scott talked about the sustainable community plan. What will the city's future economic base be comprised of? We know that Roxall and Interfords are our main taxpayers in our community, along with the residents. How do we attract young working families to the community? And how do we make the community more sustainable and self-sufficient? So again, that's requiring input from everybody. So what are we doing for the asset management process? So we maintain an inventory register. So we have additions and deletions. We're undertaking some GIS mapping where we're actually taking that intellectual knowledge from the workforce. We look at the workforce that we have. If you can imagine, 30 employees or 40 employees. At the end of the day, you look at the amount of money you invested them over the cycle of their employment. You're looking at about $60 or $50 million. So you do times that by 3 generations based on the age of the community. You probably invested in this community close to $100 million in intellectual knowledge. What we're doing is we're capturing that into the GIS mapping so that it won't be lost in future generations. We won't have to go to Sam Smith and say, well, Sam retired, we don't know where that is. We don't know how many times that road has been replaced. We don't know how many pieces of pipe we've actually put in the ground there. We're gaining all that data. We're looking at our cost drivers, our O&M costs. We're constantly evaluating our operating costs, looking at the things that we have when we have staff, and we're looking through, planning through attrition. Are we going to be replacing staff? How are we going to do things differently? How are we evolving? Improvement in growth costs, so we're looking at those. We're looking at our obligations. What are our obligations currently? Renewal costs, what are our renewal costs? And we know that those are some of the factors that we're dealing with. Our revenue streams, our grant revenue, borrowing and reserve revenue, fees and DCC revenue, and rates and tax revenue. Those are our streams of revenue that we have. Outside of that, we can look at alternative streams, and that's something that the community may consider in the future. The balance the costs and revenues through economic development strategies. So we talked about, Christina talks about pinning Jello to the wall. We're always on the phone with developers wanting to develop in our community, but they're always looking for a way to try to pull one over on the community. And a classic example of that is when you get a developer that walks into town, and you know, we always have to take that with a grain of salt, but what happens is they say, well, what I'd like to do is I'd like for you to give me, I'll buy that piece of property from you, but I'd like to rezone it to a higher density. So what they do is they create instant equity for themselves. And then they borrow against that equity, and then they get some money, and they do the short turnaround, and then they leave. What we're doing is we've got a plan in place to make sure that we're not dealing with those situations, and we're actually trying to work towards getting developers that work with our current zoning bylaw, which the community has said, these are the types of things we want in those areas. There may be times where they come forward, and you may see a situation where there's going to be a public hearing because the community or developers come along and say, we would like to do this, and council says, well, let's give the bylaw the first 2 readings, which will trigger the public hearing, which will allow the community to come out and speak and tell us if they have any concerns. At that time, we're able to notify the residents within 100 meters. They're given the 10 days to provide their feedback, and they can come to the public hearing, and council is supposed to go into those public hearings unfettered. They're supposed to actually, without clear and being unbiased, they're actually supposed to hear from the community, not respond. And then take that information back and determine what they're going to do in the next steps. Do they feel satisfied in that process? That's the community continually evolving. We talked about our sustainable community plan, the policy statement. I heard somebody say, well, protect the natural assets. I was speaking to a resident the other day, and they said, well, what do you mean by that? And I said, well, the official community plan, you can put a policy statement in there if council wishes to say, not ever will we ever sell any of our natural assets. Statement made. It's not going to happen. Council can't do that. So if you want to protect those things, that's what you do. You come out and participate in these community events, and you say that that's our policy statement. We will never do that, council, so council can't do that. Divesting themselves of different assets. So people said to me, said, well, does that mean we're going to sell our water utility? No, you have to go to referendum before you can do any of that stuff. You can't just simply say, oh, we're going to sell that today. Pass a motion, we're done, we're going to sell that, council.
And that's not part of the plan at all? That's not anticipated selling water?
Absolutely not.
Not at all?
Council does not control the consumption of land or the consumption of natural assets. Council controls the land use in the community.
That
The
didn't
Crown-
answer my question.
the
My
Crown-
question was whether or not it was being considered.
Well, I have not heard from any from this council that says that we were planning to sell any assets, natural assets or anything else. But I'm going to bring forward a policy to council that says, in the Public Works Department, we have all these pieces of equipment that we're not using, that we insure every year, that we haven't used. Will you consider divesting yourself of that asset rather than maintain that in your asset registry and putting insurance on it every year, just in case we're going to use it? Why not have it a position where we could potentially ask a contractor in town, say, can you provide that service? Because we need it every 3 years. We don't need to own those things. If we have a contractor in town that owns a grader that can do grading, and we do a little bit of grading each year, why would we replace our grader? That's the type of question that I want to ask council. Council will make those decisions, and based on what we heard from Golden and their experience in saying, they want to engage the community and ask them, make sure that nothing is wrong, make sure that everybody's going to be happy with that. It might make the grader operator unhappy because he's not going to be able to run the grader, but at the end of the day, the community is going to say, we're not going to replace that $250,000 asset. We're saying to ourselves, once it's expired its useful life, we do not want to own that. We will ask Bob's grading service to come in and grade our roads for us once a year for us. He can carry the cost of advertising that asset. He can carry those costs. So we're not looking at selling off community-owned piping. We're not looking at selling community roads. We're not looking at selling anything that provides services to the community, unless council says through policy that they, the tangible capital assets that they own, as identified in the tangible capital asset policy, those would be things they might consider. So that's the things that they have to look at in the long term. We look at the 1 to 5 year investment program, the project scope, project alternatives, strategic project deferral, looking at their different projects. Like one of the situations we're dealing with right now is our sewage ponds are filled, and we have to do something with that. It's our own solid waste from our community, and it has to go somewhere. So we heard a plan from Urban Systems, but we have to pull it out of there. We have to dry it, and then we have to figure out how we're going to dispose of it. We just saw in Merritt, the Regional District of Central Okanagan was taking theirs over to Merritt, and the First Nations man there's turned the trucks around because you're not disposing of it here. So the thing is, but in our community, it's all of ours. We all own it. So we have to make a decision on what we're going to do with it. Do you want it? No other community is going to want it in their backyard. It's your stuff. You deal with it. I mean, that's the truth. It's like, why should you get to dump it in our yard? They're going to say, what are you going to do? So we're going to have to figure out a plan. We're going to have to figure out a way to dry it. We're going to have to figure out a way to apply it to certain areas while always protecting the aquifer, because we have to protect our aquifer, because anywhere we have planned to apply it, we're going to have to talk to Graham Watt and Kettle River Watershed Study, and we're going to have to talk about how is that going to potentially affect the watershed. And we're going to have to engage the community, because it's going to affect somebody. It's going to make somebody mad, I can guarantee it. So then we have to figure out now how we're going to allocate available budget, deliver annual capital programs that are actually going to be aligned to that. So we're actually moving towards that right now. And council's going to be hearing, we've got a grant application in this year to look at a policy, for council to look at a policy on how they're going to allocate and develop the cost strategies for the budget, how they're going to do that. They're going to be figuring out how they're going to deliver these capital programs. What are the key priorities? What are going to be the number 1 priorities? What are going to be the number 2 priorities? And what are going to be the number 3 priorities? Because we know we can't do it all. We have all the roads. Everybody's road's important to them. We know that we have reservoirs that need to be expanded in the future. We know that we have a sewage treatment plant that needs to be upgraded for the discharge area, because we know that downstream from us, somebody's consuming the effluent that we discharge. So we discharge our water, our effluent into receiving waters, and then somebody downstream is going to be consuming that. Just like people from upstream from us are discharging their effluent, and it comes into our aquifers through the river, and it infiltrates into our aquifer. So we're relying on the provincial government to keep those standards up so we can protect our water. Then we have to develop our annual reports. So as we do this, we have our annual report that comes out each year. We have to progress report to council. So what we're doing with council is we're constantly progressing and identifying what we're doing in our plans and how we're doing that. So each month in the monthly reports, you'll see from our staff that these are the things that they've been working on. But it's identifying these elements and in the budget process. Do they tie to the asset management plan? If it's a simple wish list from a member of the staff, that doesn't exist. Just so you know, council makes the decisions. Staff doesn't get to make any decisions about that. Expenditure monitoring and ad hoc reporting. So we're going to be continually talking about this, whether it's us reporting at the Rotary or getting ad hoc requests from the community. This is an ongoing process. It will not stop. This is how we do business. These are the things that we have to address each day. So one of the things, what have we done? We've looked at our staff capacity. We've developed our team and how we're going to do this, and it starts with me. And it starts with council. Us talking about it. I mean, the management team says to me, can we not talk about asset management today? You know, we have our management meetings. I mean, that's what they say, because that's all I talk about. I mean, I'm very, very deliberate about that, because I have to say, it has to fit within this envelope of asset management. We've got a data process, a workflow, and process assessment. So what we're doing right now is looking at capturing all of our knowledge. I mentioned that to our IT services. The asset management policy, you'll see it on the outside of the wall there. It's a robust policy, but it's a living document. I want to make sure that everybody knows that it can always be changed. But it is the how we operate as staff. We operate under policy. The 20-year investment plan. I'm going to walk you through this. So in 2011, when all this started with council, when councils finally made the decision to do this, the engineers came in, they did the condition assessment, and in 2011 they identified we had about a $6.5 million infrastructure gap. We needed to invest $6.5 million that year. We didn't have it. So what do? We simply have to push this out a little bit. In 2012 we need to put another $4 million in to close our gap. We have $127 million in the corporation. That's what we're worth. We're a $127 million corporation. We have a $32 million infrastructure backlog, and each year we depreciate by $3.85 million. So the reality that we're facing, in order for us to catch up, we're going to go through some of these spikes here, but when we start to hit about 2017, we look like we need to put in another $10 million. By 2021, we need another $10 million. And as we move on down the line, we need to put in a certain amount each year. So how are we going to do that? The thing that we're going to have to do is we're going to have to make sure we have our business in order here first. Once we have the business in order, then we're actually able to look at other streams of revenue, because we know that we can't simply afford to do this on our own. We have the bylaw 1923 and 1922. Those bylaws were passed by referendum by 70% of the electorate said, yes, we will borrow that money. They agreed to borrow $5.5 million, and they would fund that over 25 years just to touch. You know, in 2011, we need to put in $6.5 million or $7 million. We agreed to borrow $5.5 million. That represents a 17% tax increase each year for 25 years. And that addresses 4% of your infrastructure backlog based on your current value. So we look at that and we say, well, how can you do that? How is that sustainable? That's our job. Our job is to make sure we bring alternatives to council, saying to you, do you want sidewalks on both sides of the street? Here are some options. Do you want to go with the community forest? How do we look at other options? Do we go with 25 centimeters narrower on each side of the road? When we look at our replacement values, that's a tabletop exercise. It takes 53 kilometers of road. You can save some money there.
So where is all this money going to come from? Where is the borrowing come from? All I keep hearing is this magical thinking, all these things we need. Where's it come from? Where does the shoe drop?
Well, this is the plan. We have to figure that out together.
You don't have any ideas?
Well, I've got several ideas. Some of them are dealt with council at different levels. Some of those items are discussed in open public meetings. Some of them are discussed in other areas. We're talking about adding to our taking our lands development showcase, taking lands that are not generating any revenue that the city owns, that are a liability, that are costing us money to maintain, and generating taxation from those properties. If we can do that, we can better understand our financial position.
Generating taxation as in selling them?
Selling them to people, like say for instance, if I have a piece of land, this is owned by the community approved, we have several properties. A developer would like to come in and he would like to put in 35 units. Those 35 units will then be paying taxes to the community, which is 35 units that we don't currently have paying taxes. So that's the idea, that's kind of the concept. So that's what we're talking about with council right now. So as we move forward, looking at these challenges, there are big challenges in front of us. We know right now that we need to be putting about $4 million a year to catch up. We know that we have our current funding level is somewhere a little bit below $1 million, but we need to be at about $2 million a year for us to be sustainable. I'm going to say to the council, I'm going to say, let's think about taking a little bit more risk, because the engineers have come along and said, these are the engineers' standards. The engineers are basically, I'm sorry Scott, but they're very conservative. Councils and communities don't live that way. Because you can't. The engineer would like to make sure that pipe is going to last for 60 years. we do condition assessments on some of our pipes, and I've done this before, where a pipe that has been, that's been 100 years old, it's expired its natural life, no useful life left in it, we've gone in and done a condition assessment, and it has 100 years of life left in it. So that's why we do our condition assessments. The other thing we look at is saying, when we track our information in our GIS system now, we'll be able to look at those pipes when they're breaking. And when our team goes out and does work on them, they'll have to put that information into the computer. So as that populates up, when we look at that project, we say to go to council and we say, well, we've had 4 breaks in this pipe in the last 6 years. That pipe is, according to the engineers, has expired its useful life. We'll have the data that'll actually make those decisions for council. It'll make it easier for them, rather than somebody come along saying, the engineer said that that has expired its useful life. So therefore, when we don't have any records of repairs, we should replace that. Well, that's not good enough. I need more data for me to go to council and say that's a good decision. So what are we doing in here? We look at this right now. So the city's looking at this funding gap. This funding gap is looking at how do we generate that capital. So the question that was raised to us, so if we're looking at, we need to raise $2 million a year, well, if we can generate, if we get community forests and we can generate revenue from that, I don't know what that would be worth. We can generate more taxation from our current lands, and that represents another $350,000 a year if we were to build that out in 20 years. That gives us a better picture of what we're looking at. Then we can consider lowering our levels of service. We can also,
how can reducing lower levels of service and selling off one-time assets for a few $100,000 meet $2 million plus requirements? It's still not getting there.
right, that's right, it's not getting there. But this is the challenges that we face. Because we're a corporation that, as council sees, council last night saw a request for $400 for a community event, but they've also got a $2 million or a $3.85 million deficit. So these are the situations that they're constantly tackling. And they have this grant and aid policy. And people are coming forward and saying, can we have grant and aid for these projects? But council's saying, well, hang on a sec, we've got to look at this. What's our priority here?
All right, going back to the $2 million plus a year that we need to raise, what other options are there than selling off one-time assets,
Well,
reducing the size of roads, reducing the level of, or the age of pipes, and doing things like that? This isn't creating something that will generate income. You're just talking about making these assets.
so currently, and I'll address this question, then maybe I'll address questions at the end if I could. But I was going to say, like, currently the council we have the slag pile, and the slag pile generates $235,000 a year. So there's another stream of revenue. So there's an example of that. So we have to compound these things and put them together. But does it get us to $2 million? No. I'm not gonna stand up here and tell you that I have a magic potion, because as soon as you tell me what the magic potion is, I will run with that, and we'll be able to answer that question, and we'll get the community input, and that will be outstanding. We have to look at densities in our community. Do we do urban sprawl? Do we look at our current zoning requirements for subdividing a piece of property? These are bite-sized chunks, but right now in our community it says, thou shalt have a property of current standards before you can subdivide it. But what if we relax those standards and allow there to be a little bit more densification in the community? That would be up to the community to give you an option to tell you if you want to do that or not. But you wouldn't have to add any infrastructure, but you could add another property, which would generate more taxation. This is bite-sized chunks. There's not going to be one solution that's going to address this all in one shot. So I think that's the message here is we've got to start working on this, and this is what council decided to do in 2011. So how are we going to achieve financial sustainability? So we must fund what we must fix now by undertaking essential projects. We must undertake risk assessments to prioritize, refine, and renew the investments. Reduce the $3.85 million. I look at Grand Forks being worth $127 million. Could we get ourselves down to about $100 million in assets? Is that reasonable? Is that a reasonable expectation? That's council to say to us, can you actually reduce some of these assets, like the grader? Do we need a grader? Do we need that? I mean, these are bite-sized chunks that will hopefully get us in that direction. We need to increase revenues by developing tax policy that aligns with infrastructure renewal requirements. We don't want to simply go off taxation increases, because taxation we just talked about bylaws 1923, 1922. That represents a 4%, it addresses 4% of the backlog of infrastructure requirements, and that's a 17% tax increase each year for 25 years. That's not sustainable. We know that. But what council decided at the time was, if there was going to be a grant announcement, they want to have some dollars ready. So if the province was going to give you $4 million and you were required to put in a third, you had to have your money ready to go. So that's what the referendum was meant to do. Council was not going to go out and start spending that money and just say, well, let's address 4% of those concerns. They wanted to make sure they were financially ready. So they had to develop, we've got to develop a financial policy that aligns with infrastructure conditions, capacity, and compliance requirements and public input. So again, this is something that the public is going to have a considerable amount of input on. Determine community priorities. Determining what the priorities of the community are. Because we all know that there's different portions of the community that have different interests. So they have to figure out, council has to make the decision based on public input, what are the priorities. Develop a long-term prioritized capital investment plan and utilize the grant programs. So what are our essential projects? Right now we have a 20-year prioritizing scoring model that uses condition capacity for renewal projects. So our priority ones are about $700,000 a year. We know that we need to replace well number 2. We know that we need to have a firefighting capacity in our community because we all know that by having that keeps your insurance costs down. If we don't provide those firefighting capacity, our FUS numbers go up and each of your house insurances will go up substantially. So that's one of the things we have to do. We have the 5th Street water main that goes under the Kettle River. We know that project is in a challenging position. Going back to well number 2, we've applied for a grant in the Strategic Priorities Fund for that $1.3 million because we don't want to borrow that. Council said, wait a minute, why don't we go after the grant program to get this project and see if we can fund it through the Strategic Priorities Fund. The Kettle River water main crossing, it's about a $450,000, $500,000 project. Council said, well, let's put that one into a position where if we had to borrow our own money, we could do that rather than spend their own $1.3 million. So then we have 22nd Street and 3rd Street and 68th Avenue. 68th Avenue has been addressed. The 3rd Street and 22nd Street issues are on 3rd Street we have you're going to see the crew's going to be out there next week. We have a failing sewer system just right in front of the Sunshine Valley services. That has been constantly filling in there, and there's been a depression in the road there, and we have to get in there and address that. We don't know if it's a sewer main that's collapsed in there. We don't know if we've got the cameras down there. We've seen some gravels. We don't know if the water, because there's a water service, there's a gas line in there, there's a storm line in there, but that road project is a key element for us along the lines of economic development as well. 22nd Street, we know that goes out to the hospital. It's a key priority for us. It's been identified by council in the past, but that doesn't preclude this council from saying, well, let's change all of that. Let's do something else. Let's talk to the community, find out if there's any changes in priorities. We need to improve our fire protection. The sewage treatment plant has requirements for us because we must meet our provincial and federal requirements for discharging the water. The upgrades to East Side Reservoir, we know we have some IHA expectations there, the Interior Health Authority. The groundwater quality and licensing. This is the sticker for us. As council, you can be rolling along nicely and have a great plan in place, and then the health authority can walk in and they can say, you shall build a water treatment plant and meet the 43210 objective. You don't have any choice in that matter. It will be it's a regulatory agency, and I've seen this in the Okanagan where small people just saying, what the heck? They are getting parcel taxes of $800 a month applied to their properties because the Interior Health Authority said, you will build this, or we will take away your license to operate. You will not be able to provide this service. The communities are sitting there going, well, and councils are sitting there, well, what are our options? What do we do? And that's a question that councils are, so then they go to UBCM and they lobby the provincial minister and they say, you have to stop this, we can't do this, we can't afford this. And that's what councils do when they go to those meetings and they put together a case of why they can't do that. So we constantly work towards achieving a water quality standard to avoid that, but we don't know what's going to happen in the future. Biosolids management. Again, that's our sewage lagoons that are filling up. They have a finite life, but they are filling up and we have to deal with that. And we talked a little bit about the effluent discharge. So we talked a little bit about the short-term and the long-term borrowing. What's next? It's raising awareness right now, and that's what we're doing tonight. We're raising awareness. Council's going to be setting a financial policy direction, so at least get us moving in the right direction financially. When it talks about this, they might say to me, they might say in that policy that the staff will bring forward options for the council when it comes to revenue generation opportunities or partnerships with other local governments, looking at other things that could be potentially could generate revenue, but they're going to ask for that. Economic development, seeking out alternative sources of revenue. We just talked a little bit about that, but economic development is a key one for us as well. We know that our growth rate has been in a negative pattern. how do we change that? And how do we look at things a little bit differently? How do we work and stimulate our own local economic development situation? Develop an integrated capital investment plan based on community priorities and policy and affordability. You know, councils, you know, they want to make sure that it maintains an affordability for the community. They know that they don't want to make that decision on their own, because can you imagine being the council sitting there and you have to make a hard decision, like Christina Benty was talking to you about. It's like, what a horrible situation to be in. If you ever have been a councillor or aspire to be a councillor, one of the things that's most painful is you watch a councillor sit there and then you watch the pain that they go through because of the public persecution, because they decide they want to stand up and do something right for the community. And then somebody stands there and they beat them down. They phone their house, they beat down on them, they're ignorant towards them, and they're disrespectful towards them, and they're basically, I'm just trying, but yet they're persecuted. So then somebody says, I'm running. I'm going to go in there and I'm going to fix it. And then they're going, holy smokes, I had no idea, this is horrible. I hate this feeling. This is, and there's another person that does strategic planning, and they do these things, but they say that, and this is probably one of the biggest words of truth that I've heard in this industry, is councils are elected to disappoint the public. That's the truth. Because there's nothing they're going to say that's going to keep everybody happy. And that's what they have to constantly deal with. There's this yin and yang. If one person's happy you made this decision, there's somebody over here throwing rocks at you. And that's the truth. Because I feel for council in that respect. Setting our direction, measure and report. One of the things that we're doing here is, we're you know, and the question was raised, what else are we doing? What I'm working with our Public Works Department on is stretching out, putting our asset management plan in place, and working on solutions to stretch out the life of our assets. How do we do that by doing better maintenance management on that? How are we tracking those things, and how are we doing better? And reporting that back to the public. So the key elements of this program, we're doing this stuff. We've been doing it all along, and we're going to continue to do it unless council tells us to do something different. But we are leading the way in local government. The other thing to keep in mind here is just to understand how it breaks down. We own a $20 million facility business. We own a $4 million fleet. We own a $27 million water distribution system. We own a $26 million sanitary sewer system. We own a $5 million stormwater system. We own a $10 million electrical utility and a $35 million roadway. That's what the city owns as a major corporation. So that puts you to the value of $127 million. So we have to run these businesses, and we have to make sure that they are sustainable for the future, because if we're going to continue to own all these things and deliver these levels of service, there's a cost to it. So we look at the sustainable community plan. That gives us a guiding document. Like I said, if you want to stop anything from ever happening in there, engage, come on out, and talk to council about this, because this is usually done every 5 years. Now, in 2011, the sustainable community plan was done, and every 5 years, because the reason you do it every 5 years is because the values of the community sometimes evolve and they change a little bit. A gap analysis and assessment, the asset management policy, 20-year asset management plan, long-term cash flow model, risks, curriculum development for training. We've got our program that we're working with Selkirk College on. We were just out talking a little bit about that in the last couple of weeks, and there's a lot of interest in that now, so that may be a mechanism for us to get people coming in. Actually, our original concept when I was working with Selkirk and Jen Wetmore, we were talking with the federal government saying, how can we bring in, because education is a $5 billion a year revenue stream to the province, and we own this $127 million business. Could we actually bring people in to learn how to do asset management in our community for a long-term program? Could we actually generate long-term revenue with the province? As that being a solution for council to consider, if we could align those policies? Would it be great for Selkirk? These are the things we have to look at, and then try to balancing the borrowing of funds to renew the infrastructure. But I think that's one of the things we want to look at last. One of the things I talk about with the staff is saying, without cutting a person and without raising taxes, tell me how you're going to generate more revenue. I'd like to have that charrette process with the community too, and say, what do you think? How are we going to do this? What would you like to see? We heard from Golden, they said, well, if you can incrementally raise our taxes, we want to maintain the current service levels, but knowing that $1 million to replace a kilometer of road, and we have 53 kilometers of road. So just so you know, when you look at that, to do all that replacement at once, it's a lot of money. And the thing that I think the most important message here is everything is hard before it gets easy. This is not an easy road. There's nobody out here in BC, and this is across Canada and the United States. Every community decided, let's build an overpass. You see these big overpasses, you've got these big bridges, you've got all these different things. Let's overbuild our water reservoirs, let's overbuild the pipes in the ground. You have to replace them one day. You can't get away with not replacing it. So the key to this is, let's figure out some solutions and pass the policy along for the next generations. Let's talk about the marathon, and Christina talked about it being a relay. It's a relay marathon where council simply sets the direction and they pass that baton on, because in 4 years, how is the council supposed to determine how this is all going to happen? They have to say, well, we got some good ideas, let's work with the community, let's shape the community plan, and then let's pass the baton on. And then the next group will come in and say, well, I've got some great ideas, we're going to do this, we're going to do this, this, and this, and this. We are slowly continually evaluating how we do it, but we can't rush to the finish line on this, and I think that's the most important message is, it's going to take an ongoing input from the community. It took us 100 years to get here. If we're going to turn this cruise ship around in the duck pond, it's not going to happen in 5 years. It's going to be 15, 20 years before our business plan is properly in place, before we can realize our full potential. And that means, what the policy decisions the council makes. I had just a good example that I saw the other day was we were looking back at our old financial statements, and by no way am I suggesting this. Actually, no, I didn't say it, so I'm not even going to go there. But in 1959, the community generated $4,159 from parking meters. I would never suggest that, but I was looking at that, and I was looking at this little book with the auditors report, and I gave it, I said, look at this document, because we were putting the stuff back in after the fire. And we had this little document. I said, we had parking meters in 1959? I was astounded by that. It was just, it was an interesting document. It was an interesting piece of literature that our community has, because there's a lot of history in the community when it comes to the decisions of local government. And this is not easy. So when your elected officials are doing their jobs, they're not going to find solutions to this right away. They're constantly working on this. So I want you to take away from tonight is, if you could just even start to spread the word a little bit, and we can get the community engaged a little bit more, because if somebody has a magic bullet or a solution for this, it would be much appreciated. So I'd like to thank the presenters that were here tonight, but while we do that, why don't we bring them on up and we can answer some questions for you, if there are any. Sure, I'll start with your Mr. Cook.
My question is for you,
Yes.
From the water meter issue, the funds that are still left from that, in the urban system engineering report, there always was a priority to get that well put in.
Yes.
And that priority was not addressed, as you're not aware. Is there enough money left in the balance of that 1.3 million to do that well? Out of that money, so no cash, no more money has to be borrowed to do the $600,000 well?
No. Sorry. The question was, is there enough money remaining in the gas tax fund that was used towards the water meter installations for the installation of the new well number 3? The answer is no.
How close are you to that?
I'm not sure the balance off the top of my head. I don't know, based on our federal gas tax contribution this year, I believe it's around 200 and...
No, I'm saying out of the 1.3 million.
That we had?
Yeah, what's
okay.
that?
I'm not sure at this point. I couldn't tell you off the top of my head. I'd want to give you an accurate number.
Are you thinking 500,000?
I don't even want to guess at this point. I would just say to you that I'd rather give you an accurate number. So if you would like to
my point is then that if there is, whatever is left could still be used to prioritize that well that needed to be replaced, which is what you need to cover off a lot of other possible issues. And I would suggest that. The other thing I wanted to ask you about is really how much research has been done on other alternate solutions to the water issue. And I'm just going to say this, and this might sound somewhat out of left field, but if you lived in Sweden, it's not. Septic tanks and fields have been illegal in Sweden since 1977.
Yep.
Waterless toilets. The water consumed in any home runs anywhere from 35% to 40% of that water goes through the toilets. Waterless toilets would alleviate 35 or 40% of all water consumption the use of, lower the use of the sewage treatment plant.
Yep.
Lower the use of the additive, whatever additives have to go into the water, because you're treating all water as if it's going to be potential drinking water.
Yep.
Those toilets can be bought, and you can, there's a distributor just out of Toronto. The toilets are worth this, for a 4 to 6 person family are worth about $2,500. For a town this size, for say approximately 1,800 homes, that would have been worth about say $400,000. That could have reduced your water supply by 35% or better for 12 months of the year, and all the ancillary items that could have gone with it. Other parts of the world, Germany, in particular Sweden, Finland, are using those features. Those are one-time capital outlay costs that will serve the community and reduce the water consumption by 35% for 12 months of the year.
Sure, and you know, it's a great point, because as we look at things differently, we have to figure out how we're going to transmit those solids down a gravity-fed pipeline that runs at 1%.
No, you don't
And,
have, no.
and when we talk about this, but you know, I mean, the points you're raising, absolutely. The current technology that exists in other communities, that wasn't part of the council's strategic priorities in the water conservation plan. The water conservation plan that was adopted by council in the prior council, there was a report developed by our engineering firm that was a very good plan, and the outcomes of that plan were, in order to achieve 25% reduction in water consumption, the plan identified water meters as the #1 priority. So that was a plan that was adopted by council. So at that time, that plan was before council, and the community has the opportunity to speak. So we talk about this from the
We did
opportunity.
speak about that last summer, but beside the point is that with waterless toilets, you can buy them, they're either electric or they can be powered by electric and natural gas. Any liquids are vaporized, they're gone, and any solids are burnt to an ash. I should have brought you in some information on them. I can still drop it off for you.
It sounds like a great alternative for us moving forward. Maybe something we could implement into the building code, or look at. But then here again, this comes back down to the sustainable community
Well, it's
plan
something
and that value structure.
It's something literally every community in Canada could be at the forefront of, because it's being done in other nations.
I think it's a great idea. It's a great idea.
I'll bring you in some information.
Perfect. Thank you.
I have a question. I'm just wondering about Karen's
Oh.
question.
Could you speak up, please?
Oh, I'm just asking if she has.
Oh, about the leveraging.
And then I
Okay.
will ask during the-
Sure. So when I was talking about leveraging, if I have $100 in my pocket, and I keep it in my pocket, I still have $100. But if I put $100 on the table, and the federal government puts $100 on the table, and the province puts $100 on the table, now I have $300. So that's what I meant by leveraging. So you have the opportunity with the New Canada Build Fund that as a community, if you put in your third, if you're successful in the grant, you have to put in your third in order to receive the other 2/3. That's all I mean by leveraging.
And different grants have different requirements.
Yes.
So the Strategic Priorities Fund, we've applied for $1.3 million to build the well. The cost of the well. We've applied. Was this covered at 1.3?
Yeah, it would be, well, just slightly below that, but then that's 100%.
That's 100%
So
funded.
it'll be no cost to you.
And that's a relatively new program that was announced not that long ago. Because for the longest time, it's always been 1/3 community, 1/3 feds, 1/3 province. So this, the strategic fund is relatively new, and I can assure you it's going to be oversubscribed. The benefit to communities like Golden and Grand Forks is we're ahead of the game in terms of our asset management plans. So that actually helps us be more successful in achieving those grants.
And just adding to that, that's what I've been out promoting the gas tax stuff for UBCM. So I've said to council, I've been doing some brown nosing for council. So for the community, so we can get this grant. I've been working very hard on getting this regional. Our regional contribution has been our successes in asset management towards the program. So it requires a regional contribution, and that's where our program is being utilized. That we're saying to other communities, you can experience what we've experienced now. So there's an opportunity for you. Yes, Anna.
So I was looking at some of those and they look familiar. Are the stats for how the expected life expectancy from the stable community plan, or have they been changed since then, these stats?
So the posters, the posters that you see out there are from some of the previous asset management presentations that you've seen before. Council is still going to be setting risk levels. So those numbers could actually lower a little bit. So if council accepts more risk, they say, well, we'll stretch that life out. It's like stretching a mortgage out to 40 years versus a 10-year mortgage. You know,
So the life expectancy will still, might be reevaluated?
it's always being evaluated every year.
And then from other parts of the presentation, I was understanding you're keeping track of repairs, where, when, to give you an idea of how different parts are doing.
Absolutely.
And that's all part of the management plan. And then you had your 20-year plan that was with the initial information you had before all this was added, correct?
Yeah, so the 20-year plan is before council. Now council will have the decision to, defer, taxation increases, or how they're going to manage this. So financially, this goes back to 2011, that 20-year capital plan. So we're now in 2015. So we've simply deferred 4 years of this because we didn't invest the $6 million in that first year that were required. So we're continually working on this right now.
And since you are open to ideas, and we want to build trust and communication in the community, I'm thinking if once, say if you see which things, when you reevaluate things, if you get an idea about life expectancy and which ones need, priority, can you have a fund that the public can regularly know how much money is in there, and they can even add to it, and know what it's being used for? It's just a community awareness thing of this account, and how the city is adding to it, what's the state of it, and making that more public might be interesting.
So I think,
and good for the community and
sure.
and spirit.
So when we're talking about our budget process, council embarked, last council embarked upon a committee of the whole process for the budget meeting. So all of those questions the council invited the community in to participate in the budget cycle and the budget process. The questions that were raised, but adding that new element to it, that's a great idea. What can we do to make it so the community can participate and be more engaged in the budget process? That's something that the community will tell the council what they want. Would they like to have 10 more meetings, 10 more budget meetings, so it's available for them?
How about some more public meetings so everything doesn't go into the black hole of in-camera meetings?
So councils have very strict rules in terms of what they
We
can
know
go
what the rules
into.
are, and we know what's mandatory to be in camera. We know what's not mandatory.
That's hardly the point here tonight. Why don't you just-
And what
So-
we're asking for, you're talking about you want transparency, you want conversation. Well, we're giving you conversation. And we're telling you it's hard to trust the city government when they keep having in-camera meetings about things that they don't need to have in-camera meetings about.
And so you keep saying we, how are you speaking for all of us? If you could just keep the tone as collaborative conversation as opposed to confrontational courtroom. We were invited here as to be part of this forum.
Could you identify yourself, please?
My name is Gina Burr.
Gina, thank you.
But you never identified yourself.
My name is Karen
And your last name?
Bond.
Thank you.
I do
Thank
like
you.
to clarify, my intention wasn't about reevaluating all the finances. My comment was about that community engagement and the building trust. So keeping the community up to date on that account.
Sure,
And how it's going regularly.
Sure.
And maybe even have a thermometer. How are we doing with putting some money aside for this infrastructure replacement?
And I can just tell you from a political perspective how challenging it is to engage the community. In the past, I have, council meetings are open to the public. I know as mayor, I did regular mayoral reports, and we had, so I would do once a month. People would be invited to the budget meetings. They would be invited to, we had coffee clatches and stuff like that. So asking your politicians, hey, I'd like more conversation is really is really great. The challenge is getting people to participate. You get, I remember Gregor Robertson from Vancouver one time said, we're going to pass a bylaw, and do you want me to come to each of your house and read it while, so you can go to sleep? And it was so, because it was that message, and I'm not talking about you, but it's just, yeah, it's exactly, and every time, but you
It's not about
can,
all the engagement,
yeah.
it's just one idea, and I'm curious.
Thank you, Donna. And you know, I think, you know, I've heard the question, and I think that's something, the question you need to ask your elected officials, how they would like to present that. But moving on to another question, so we can come back if you have more questions.
So bring that to council then?
You can ask your councilors to do that by resolution. Council can direct staff to say, our priority is to simply deal with this and engage the public, and our staff time will be put towards that. Don't look after the infrastructure or hire more staff to do this, we can do this. Council directs the process for us. If council feels as though we need to engage the public more, council will say to us, Doug, I need you to develop a communications process that will engage the public on the budget process, and I'd like a report back, and I would like for you to tell me how much that's going to cost, and I would like for us to make a decision on that. And council will either say, through resolution, somebody will put a resolution on the floor, it would get seconded, it would go to debate and discussion, and then council would vote on that decision. If they decided that was their process, that's what I do. So if the staff comes to me and says anything else, by all means, that's what we do. There is no and, if, ors, or buts about it. So council has that power to do that. So if they would like to direct the energy of the community to be focusing on that, that's their prerogative. That's.
So, one of the things you mentioned, it came to light last year, was the little sludge island we have, and I know that there's a local company, actually originally from Saskatchewan, but was purchased by people who are locally. They market a bioremediation system to deal with that, and it looks like you're not going that way. I'm just curious, what was the deciding factor there? Because it sounds like that would end up with us not having to worry about what do we do with just dried sludge, and how do we get rid of it?
That's a great question. We've invited the individual to undertake a pilot project with the city to demonstrate it before we jump in full force. We have to understand does it meet the provincial receiving water requirements? Does it change the biological process? Because we know that active bacteria is our friend in the sewage treatment pond. So we want to make sure we have as much active bacteria as possible. So the science behind that, I'm not going to pretend that I am a scientist in that respect. What I'm going to say is we've invited the person to come in and undertake a pilot project with us and demonstrate that it does work. And then if it does work, and it does still then pass all the federal and provincial regulatory requirements for us, absolutely. Then what we would have to do, according to our purchasing policy, is go out for a request for proposal, in all fairness, and then depending on the price thresholds, if it was under $5,000, we could work directly with that person. If it was between $5,000 and $10,000, we'd be required to get 3 quotes. If it was over $10,000 and under $50,000, we'd get 3 written quotes would be attached to that for the auditors to review. If it's over $50,000, it must go to public tendering, according to council's purchasing policy. So putting that into round, we can't just, as staff, we can't go and say, well, we like your project better. We must make sure that we create an open and fair bidding process.
Good, okay.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I'd like to ask a question about Christina Benty. Cost, you were talking about engaging the community and community relations and so on, and it was brought up as an awful lot of in-camera meetings, and the public doesn't understand what's going on. We had a bylaw, 1973 it was, which was totally erroneous, and was brought out to council, it's supposed to be getting changed. Okay, talking about bylaws, so that the public understands the bylaws, what would it cost to have a little flyer available throughout the city, and with every bylaw, just read it out, 30, 40 here, 40, 50 there, 500 of these copies around, or less, maybe even 40. So if the public really wanted to see what is really going on in a bylaw, they would have access to it, not just by, we're not seeing a lot of, in this city, a lot of old age pensioners, they're not computer geeks. They're kind of difficult getting into the city, whatever it's called.
Archives, like the
The archives, yeah. And so, yeah, you could probably find it there if you know what you're doing. But I to the city, whatever it's called,
Archives.
the archives, yeah. And so, yeah, you can probably find it there if you know what you're doing. But I had great difficulty finding it. And if we had a little, as I say, pliers with the bylaw, that wouldn't be that expensive. And then nobody can come and say, well, we didn't know what's going on. Having people speaking to me say, I don't know what's in that bylaw. I don't know. Well, here it is.
Can I answer that question for
Well, let Christina answer.
Sure.
Then you answer.
Thank you. So that's the staff that has to deal with the writing of the bylaw.
Yeah.
But so what's your question is, what is the cost of communicating to the public? And I guess everybody has different ways that they prefer to be communicated to. I don't know what the cost of printing 500 flyers are,
200.
but I do know that councils have to generally do 3 readings depending on the bylaw. They'll do 3 readings in one council meeting and then the 4th in the other. And lots of times your local newspaper is usually at the council meeting, so they have the opportunity to report on that particular bylaw. And bylaws always are a process. They seldom just come to council without some discussion about the bylaw and council directing staff on the bylaw. So it really is about, I guess, reading your local newspaper. And again, I'm talking about,
The newspaper never publishes the bylaw. It's never presented.
So I don't know whether, there is, if council wanted to communicate with the public that way by printing flyers and putting them in the newspaper, they've got that option too. I know that what we do in Golden is we're starting to put staff resources towards communication so that they're out there, they're on Facebook, they're doing reports in the newspaper, we've got open houses, and again, council meetings are open to the public, the financial statements are open to the public. We have rigorous standards that we have to adhere to as local government in terms of being very transparent.
Yeah, and it's called freedom of information. And that is, it's all right very well to have on a computer somewhere, but if you've got a flyer, you can go to somebody next door and say, this is what it's saying, they see this problem with this one, what do you think of that? Then you'll get public input.
So I guess what you're saying really at the end of the day is you would like more transparency from council, more reports, that you want to know what's going on, you want to be able to read about what bylaws they're discussing and passing and all that stuff. So, and again, I guess that comes to you having, I don't know what your local politics are, and so that comes with having that conversation with the councillors. That's how you affect changes.
So just to add to that, we have over 1,000 bylaws in our system.
New bylaw.
No, not new bylaws, because there's amendments to those bylaws. Those amendments have to be tracked as well. So we have 1,000 bylaws. If we're to print 5,000 or 500 copies or 200 copies, you can imagine the order of magnitude, the printing, the printer, the impact on the printer, the ability to circulate those. We would rather have the ability to have a customer come to us and say, I call them customers, and I hope I don't mean to offend anybody, but we provide customer service. So if we're doing this, if a customer comes to us and says, can I get a copy of that bylaw? We're not going to say that we can, but we can't be the priority for that day because we have to meet our legislative requirements unless the person has a copy of it available on their desk from the council agenda the night before. So, or the week before. So, because the bylaws change every year, because the financial time bylaw is a new bylaw every year. And those bylaws have perpetuity in our system. The same thing with the amendment to the noise bylaw or any other bylaw. So they basically live in our system for a long
So
time.
therefore, once a month, all the changes, just the little amendments and all the new bylaws, it wouldn't be more than 5 pages.
Interesting point. So maybe it's a discussion that we could have with, you could undertake with the newspapers, see if they would like to change the process. And we could have a discussion with your council and ask if your council would like to focus the efforts on directing staff to implement that. That would be
less expensive actually to maybe have 2 or 3 places where these are left, like the newspapers are, free newspapers.
Like at the library, public library,
That's
with once with all the bylaws, and then even when the city isn't open, you can go there physically to see it.
great idea. That's a great idea. That sounds like a great idea.
The bylaws, any changes that are happening to the bylaws that are being passed by council at council meetings are published in the agendas and in minutes. So when you come to a council meeting and you pick up that printed copy, it's in booklet form, you can take it home with you. You see the changes and you have a copy of that. But I know we get sent them usually Thursday or Friday prior to a council meeting for review. And trust me, I've sat and read through 233 pages of the subdivision bylaw. We don't want to be printing that out in flyer form. I mean, just even tackle that as one of them.
I believe a new bylaw should be printed out and made available to the public in flyer form. It's not so big, and the little amendments, as I said, is less than 5 pages. Only the thing that we look at when we come to the council meetings, it's all in draft. It is not printed all the way up. I had trouble finding what was wrong with the water meter bylaw. And actually, we've still got a big problem we have to address that. It would have been a lot easier if it had been just available. So,
Thank you, Mr. Hamilton. Thank you.
Just another comment on that, Mr. Hamilton, is that the agendas are online, and included in the agendas would be the bylaws that are going to be considered at that meeting. So if you didn't want to pick up the whole bylaw, you could certainly go online and extract those pages.
right.
Yeah.
The newspaper is also available online. How many people go online to see the newspaper? It's not the way we do things.
Only if you subscribe to the newspaper. Only if you are a subscriber to the newspaper.
Right.
I mean, people who don't subscribe are not entitled.
Can we just put the questions for us? If you want to have any other conversations with we'd be glad to, we don't want to stand here and interfere with your conversations. Thank you.
So in Golden, are the city council meetings broadcast on TV?
They're not.
They're not?
No. We haven't invested in the technology to do that.
Okay.
This time.
Well, neither have we.
I've watched your council meetings. Yeah, okay.
Gordon Shaw, if we supported your 17% tax increase, how fast could we get some of these improvements?
Because it was supported by a referendum, the money has been approved by council or by the community. Council then would implement it into the financial plan. I just caution council on spending that money without having the grant to match it. Because you want to maximize your dollars, and like Christina was talking about leveraging. The goal of council at the time was to utilize that funding in the best way possible. So I think that it would be a little bit premature to go out and spend it, but how fast can we do it? Remember, it only addresses, that money would address the well and 4 kilometers of road. So
We know 1 kilometer needs to be.
but we have to bring that back down to the priority because it becomes, when council sets that level and says, so is some alligator and crack sealing or extending the life of that road going to be more important?
That's good.
We know that we have to deal with our arterial roads. We know that the ambulance is now going around 22nd Street to get to the hospital. And council has to make that decision. Do they want to get a water main across the river to feed into Form? Or do they want to do that? And we start to make those decisions. What is that's a decision council makes. And I feel awful for council to sit there and say, I'm going to make this decision now. And who am I going to make that? If Form has to close, then there's a water main, or somebody's going to take a monkey ride to the hospital. Somebody's going to be mad at council. There's no doubt in my mind. So that's a challenge. Your point is a good one because council can only do a finite portion of that. So 4 kilometers of road and the well.
And like I think the whole message of the evening is that this really is a long-term, we have to take a long-term view of this. And it really is a marathon relay. It is the torch passing on and it's recognizing, and local governments have not, until PSAP 3150 came into play, local governments were often guessing at what their infrastructure deficits were. And it was Montreal crumbling bridges that finally changed, it woke everybody up, and it finally changed what we needed to look at and the messaging that we needed, and that we needed to talk about it. Like I said, we are all in this together, but we need to remember at a high level, and I think it's really important to make sure that we are recognizing that all of these, it's not, we've used these assets for years, and we want them to continue to the next generation, and we have to make those decisions for the next generation. And I love what Doug said earlier, so we have 100-year-old infrastructure, and we've had in the past 3-year mandates. Those no longer mesh, and it's time for us to be looking at not just, I mean, the past is the past. Infrastructure has been deferred, the investment has been deferred. It is communities like ours that are making positive decisions for that long-term marathon. And essentially that's the message of the evening, and I hope that's been of some value to you. So I appreciate you having me here and having the opportunity to speak. I'm actually going to sneak out unless there's any other questions, because I did a 7-hour drive here, and I'm an hour different, and I've got some work that I have to do. So if anybody's got some